Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, no matter where you are in this fine land of ours, no matter what time of day it is as you listen to this, whether it's live or in the archives, on demand. I just want to say how pleased I am that you have taken time out of your schedule to join us today. It's going to be a good one today, folks, let me tell you that. I had to admit that, we produce a lot of these webinars, and they're all fantastic. But this one in particular has me thrilled and excited about the content we're going to discuss. My name is Daryl Prale. I'm the host, and today we're going to have the smartest sales conversation you'll ever hear. And it's brought to you with 4 key participants, and we're going to meet all of them shortly. Let me explain to you, though, the way the process works if you've not joined us before. We do all the talking. You ask as many questions as you want. And then when we're done talking through the main content, you will then join us in the Q&A session of the webinar. So we're going to be between, I'm going to guess, 30 to 40 minutes ballpark in the core content. At any time, you can ask a question. And to do that, whether you're running on a Windows or a Mac or a tablet, as you see in the screen in front of you, you simply go to the questions section and type away. All right, so any question you want, and it doesn't have to be limited to a question. It could be a comment, it could be sharing an anecdote to social medium. Let's have some fun with it. Everybody's in listen-only mode except the 4 people who are speaking here on the live show today. And to preempt some of the questions we get asked a lot, yes, the webinar is in fact being recorded. You will get a copy of this within a handful of days from today. And that will also include the slides, okay? Now, if you don't want to use the GoToWebinar control panel because you're a social media maven, no problem. On your favorite Twitter client, any comment or question you have, just make sure you reference #WelshExpert, as you see in the bottom of your screen there, and we'll get it then. And if you do that, we've got you covered either way. So, carry on, let's go here. Our presenters, our panelists, Michael Birch, Daniel Solin, myself, and Terry Ledden. All right, so let me introduce you to these guys. Are pretty brilliant, okay? So Michael Birch has been the managing partner of Welsh LLP since 2006. He's responsible for the direction and operations of Welsh LLP. He provides specialty service support in all areas of strategy, and he has extensive experience in taxation, financial, and estate planning, and cross-border consulting. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Daryl. I'm looking forward to this one.
Oh, I am too. All right. Joining Michael is Dan Solin. He's a graduate of Johns Hopkins University and the University of Pennsylvania School of Law. Before becoming an investment advisor, Dan was an antitrust and international trial lawyer in New York City, where he represented a number of Fortune 500 companies. He is also the New York Times best-selling author of The Smartest Sales Book You'll Ever Read, and the Smartest series of investment books, which consists of 6 investing books. His books have been enthusiastically endorsed by the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, John Bogle, the founder of Vanguard, and many others. Kiplinger's put his smartest investment book on its list of the 10 best financial books ever written. It doesn't get much better than that. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Daryl. Excited to be here.
Awesome. You know me, folks. I'm just a marketer who happens to also be a sales guy, and so no more there. But let's bring up Terry Ledden, okay? Terry is founder and managing partner of the sales performance and development firm Sales About Face and Canadian authorized licensee of U.S.-based Sandler Training. He and his international team are recognized for delivering serious sales results for the serious and decisive leader. As a professional sales performance consultant, trainer, and coach for over 20 years, Terry has dedicated himself to the significant improvement in the long-term job performance, sales production, and financial success of committed Canadian businesses and sales professionals. His advice can be heard regularly on CFRA Radio in Ottawa, and he speaks regularly on the topic of sales performance growth and sales management. Terry, welcome to the show.
Hey, Daryl, thanks a lot, and a big thanks to you, Dan, and Michael for inviting me in this morning. Really appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts.
All right, so let's just kind of set the stage. Those are the 4 speakers today, and this is really a very fun, dynamic, loose, unstructured, unscripted conversation. We've got 7 talking points we're talking about today, folks. So if you joined us thinking that you're going to get a discourse on use the following tactics and techniques and you will see a productivity gain of X%, make 50 calls a day and you'll have a higher close rate. That is not what we're talking about today. In fact, what we're talking about today are what I call successful sales attributes. And every single one of these we're making, and a lot more, are outlined in Dan's book, The Smartest Sales Book You'll Ever Read. And I love his subhead. To me, that's the whole point. It is literally the truth about successful selling. And if you don't believe me, Terry Ledden was gushing when he read the book and said, oh my gosh, I love this guy. We have so much in common. So while you're waiting, if you want to multitask, and go check out his website, Daniel Solin, knock yourself out. It's available on Amazon. You can order it. But hey, it gets even better. Have I got a deal for you? The 3 best questions we get today, not 1, not 2, the 3 best questions will get a book free from us, signed by Dan. It doesn't get any better than that. Now, we're the judges, so you better make it good, because this is a tough group to impress, okay? Let's carry on. Okay, so Dan, let's just get into it. You mentioned this aspect, this attribute called grit. And I just love the word. It just sounds gritty on its own. But what do you mean when you mention grit?
Okay, so grit's a really important concept, and I think it will empower a lot of people if they understand what it is. Grit really just means perseverance. And I think a lot of people believe that they're kind of doomed from birth, meaning their genetics predetermine whether they're going to be successful or not successful in life. But there's an enormous amount of data showing that grit can overcome a lot of obstacles. The most successful people turn out to be the people who have the most perseverance. So everybody has the ability to stick to a project and just never give up, and that's what grit is. If I was picking the one characteristic that correlates positively with success, it would be, how much grit do you have?
And you use an analogy. I can't quote it exactly, but you're talking about how there's always these people who seem to do really well in life. Maybe it's in school, they just always have the answers. They show up and knock it out of the park. And then there's these people who actually have to really work at it, study and become a student. That's what you mean when you say grit. Like, it's perseverance. It's not giving up. It's just putting the time into to build your craft, I guess.
That's exactly what I mean. I mean, there's a study about children who participate in these well-publicized spelling bees, and I think a lot of us think that they're just brilliant to begin with, but it turns out that the ones that spend the most time training and practicing and going over the list of words that are likely to be asked, those are the ones who have the highest chance of success, not people who are intellectually gifted to start with.
And I think that's what shocked me, was the idea, actually, your spelling bee analogy was, you were saying those people who have studied harder, it maybe doesn't come as easy to them, were the ones who are more likely to be successful when it really counts.
That's right.
Yeah, I think there's an underlying commonality among those people that show really true grit, and I think they have a really strong sense of purpose. They have some emotional connection to what it is they're trying to accomplish, so that when the bright shiny objects in life come along, they resist getting distracted, and they stay on point. They stay on purpose. I don't know, Dan, if that's your observation as well, but it comes back to what are my goals? Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And there's so many people out there that they show up day to day, they just do their thing. It's like a sea of mediocrity, but there are always those people who are struggling, they're working hard, they're really they're getting out of the comfort zone, they're not allowing adversity to get in their way, but there's that inner steel, there's something that's truly driving them to hang on and just keep going. I don't know.
Yeah, no, there is a wonderful book by Malcolm Gladwell called The Outliers.
Yeah.
And the bottom line of the book, which is not without controversy, but the bottom line of the book is people who spend 10,000 hours working at almost anything are likely to be very successful at it. The difference between amateur musicians and professional musicians turns out to be how many hours of practice did you put in. There's really a direct relationship. It's not, were you born a virtuoso guitarist or violinist. It's how much time and effort are you going to put in. So it's a combination of what I'm saying, I think, and what you're saying, because you can't put in that time unless you have a real passion for what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's sad to see that so many people have neither the perseverance to stick through something or the passion. My experience is the same as yours. Most people go through life kind of by rote. They don't really feel passionately about anything, and mediocrity tends to follow that.
Yeah, exactly.
What I found interesting was the fact that, based on my experience in the sales and the business world, CEOs, sales leaders, tend to be drawn into the individual who's all polished and it's all like, I'm a natural sales rep.
Yeah, the gift of gab.
The gift of gab, exactly. But I mean, to a degree, what Dan is saying is the ones who are more committed to the craft and may not be brilliant or perfect or polished out of the gate are the better long-term investment. I mean, I look at Michael and I look at Terry, maybe Michael first. How have you seen that? I mean, you're CEO of Welsh. You've seen a lot of BD people. You've got your partners, your people dealing with the community. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so from our perspective, I kind of compare it, right? This time of the year as a Canadian, I'm talking about hockey, right? And you look at hockey players and you see these brilliant stars that sort of pan out and don't have the careers that people expect of them. You have these other chaps that seem to just have grit, just have effort and continue to do it night in and night out. And before you know it, they're the new stars and they're the guys that carry the ball. And it's the same in any enterprise, and we have guys like that in our organization that, yeah, they're blessed with some set of skills, but they just work so hard and they just stay to it that the results are there for them. And others that you look at and say, man, this guy should be knocking out of the park. Just that one little thing's missing. And look through this chapter would be very good.
It turns out that it takes roughly 7 hits before you achieve a sale. In other words, it can take 7 contacts over a long period of time. Most people don't have the perseverance to stick with it. They give up with the first kind of rebuff. They don't go back. And so in the accounting profession, I suspect it's the same way. Some people stay with it, want to get better, are highly motivated. Others kind of are willing to settle for less.
And I think part of developing that grip is a bit of success, too. So if you have a bit of success in the early stage, you realize, wow, I stuck with this one and I made this time, so I know what it takes the next time. But if you don't have that, if you don't stick just quite long enough, you don't have that success, it's like, oh, I really tried hard, but...
Yeah, and the flip side of that, too, is you've got to be able to look at failure as your friend. And I get a real charge out of organizations that are run and driven by a CEO who has this mantra, failure is not an option. We will win at any cost. Come on. How many companies did you start that didn't really work out before you landed this one? So failure is reality. But the key is with grit, and to tie it back to grit, those people that have true grit have the ability to get out of the comfort zone, do something, keep on going in the face of adversity, and not worry about the outcome. And take a lesson from that and apply the lesson. What could I have done differently? And keep applying that, and that's how you get the forward momentum. You don't grow without failure. It's just not real.
What I found interesting, Dan, was your comment that 10,000 hours, you said that's roughly 1,000 hours a year, so roughly 10 years. And that was like, whoa, wake-up call to me. So if I want to change careers tomorrow, it's going to be 10 years before I'm really, really... really good.
Well, you're not working that hard if you're only billing 1,000 hours. So.
Let's get back at it.
Yeah, but your realization's way up there. So.
You need some more grit.
All right.
$1 million an hour.
Let's move on to the next conversation. And what I'll do in the meantime is I'll remind you while we're doing that if you've got a question, if you've got a comment, if you've got an opinion, and they're coming in already, so don't be shy, please send them on Twitter to Welsh Expert, make sure that's in your tweet, or in the Q&A panel of your control panel, and we'll get them. The next conversation, it sounds simple, but it's integrity. And while you don't explicitly say integrity is one of the key topics, you talk to it so many ways and angles, Dan. So maybe you can just explore a little bit what that means.
Yeah, when people hear integrity, their eyes kind of glaze over. I mean, it sounds almost trite. But the reality is that people are really smart and they're really intuitive. They know when they're being played. They know when people are being sincere and when they're not being sincere. So during this particular trip to Ottawa, I've had the pleasure of dealing with many accountants. And I think the one thing that just stands out when you meet accountants is you get this feeling of complete integrity. You may or may not like them. Maybe you're going to hire them. Maybe you're not going to hire them. But you know that they are totally honest and are going to be forthright with you. And I really wish that whatever it is that you've packaged as accountants that conveys that integrity, I really wish there was some way you could communicate it to the rest of the world, because it's incredibly powerful and alluring.
So, Terry, where do you see that in the whole sales process?
Yeah, it's so important. And rather than, talk to people about integrity, we really reinforce just be that person of integrity and let people experience your integrity. I mean, you can't fake integrity. In fact, a quick story, it won't take long. I bought a new watch a couple of days ago. And I walked into the mall. I walked into a really nice jewelry store, and I selected a watch. There were a couple of them on the counter. And in the first, I guess, minute and a half that I was in there, the salesperson obviously had some sales training. And she said to me, I'm just looking at that beautiful coat you're wearing, and the watch on the right, I think, would really go very well with that. So I couldn't believe what I was hearing this. So, and I kind of lost it for a second. I lost my sense of being caring and nurturing. And I said to her, nice try. And she kind of felt a little bit bad. So then I rescued her. I said, no, I'm just kidding. But, this coat is actually going to be hung up for the season in about 2 days. So the watch doesn't need to match the coat, right? And, that's the kind of thing that's kind of like cheesy from a sales point of view. Their moves, their tactics, and that's just wrong. Sales should be a conversation between equals with high level of integrity, by the way, from both sides. And so often we have prospective clients that will couch their words, they'll hold their cards close to the vest, they won't truly share enough with the sales professional, and that's because there's a lack of trust, and they don't see the integrity on the other side. They're fearful that if they share too much, it'll be used against them by a salesperson in a court of decision making, right?
The point of your story that I found interesting is you actually weren't kidding. In other words, when she said that, you knew you were being played,
right.
And she now lost the sales edge because she was playing you on a small thing, and just having met you briefly, I'm sure you were buying an incredibly expensive Rolex watch, so it was a really big transaction.
Half price.
And she risked losing that sale over a very minor comment.
Right.
And that's how critical integrity is.
Yeah.
When you lose it a little bit, you've just totally lost it.
Sales is a slight edge business, right, Michael? You've probably seen this. A first discovery meeting with a new client, one word said the wrong way sets them off, right?
Yep. I'm getting back to the integrity, and that's why this book, I think, resonates well with me and other professionals, is that you think integrity, and then you have this notion of what salespeople are, and salespeople are sort of like, hey, come on, look at this, and open up the jacket, or get in this car, we got to go for a ride in this car, and you think, well, it's not really integrity, but he seems to be a salesperson, so that's what it takes to be a salesperson, and we're not like that, so this is a very difficult thing for us to embrace, right? So we're like, well, how do we do this, because it's so out of our character, and now we read this book, and this is how it should be done, and this is perfect, and this is us. So this is going to be a marriage made in heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah, we went to buy a car about 6 months ago, and I was in the middle of doing research for my book, and we walked in and we spent a couple of minutes, and the sales manager came over, and his question to us was, how fast can you write a check? And this to me was like everything that's wrong with sales, and exactly what you're saying. And the public perception of salespeople is terrible. They'll say anything to get a sale. So what I'm talking about in my book is really the polar opposite of that. It turns out when you look at professionals like Michael and his firm who do it the right way, you seem to do just fine without engaging in these kinds of sharp and manipulative practices. And there's a lesson there for everyone, I think.
Yeah, and those practices, they come from the kind of training that these sales professionals are being given by their companies. And 99% of this training is about a selling system and how to overcome objections. It fails to deal with the human dynamic. It's a huge gap. And so any company has got to really challenge the core beliefs of their organization and make sure that they're on point with that and realize that we might not be a good fit in every situation and be willing to share that with a prospective client up front. But you have to believe that. And if you go in with this mindset that everybody should have what we have, it drives a negatively resulting style of behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had an experience just literally yesterday where I was working, trying to negotiate an add-on component to the Welsh Salesforce system. So I'm working with a third-party partner, and it was a dashboards reporting solution. And so far this sales rep had talked to just my digital marketer. So my digital marketer is a great guy, but this is his first job at school. So he's as junior as they get. And now we're at the price. He's given us a proposal. It's stupid expensive. I don't see the ROI. There's been no business case. My digital marketer is saying, well, can you approve it? And I said, I ain't approving this, but I'm willing to negotiate for you if you want to. And he's like, great, can I watch? And I'm sure. And we're talking to the guy, and I'm 30 seconds into the call. And this rep is like, oh, yeah, I know what you're trying to do. And Welsh is a great fit, and what we're doing for you is perfect. And I'm like, dude, you've not asked me a single question. You don't know Bupkis. You've talked to my guy who knows Salesforce and knows nothing else, but I'm a great fit for you, right? And then I asked him, help me understand your licensing. And he goes, well, that's the way we do it. I said, well, it doesn't make sense to me. I know, but that's the way we do it. And so right away, when we left the call, I'm like, okay, so he's full of BS, and he doesn't even have the answers to begin with to, we should be simple selling 101. So he has no authority. He's going to get back to me. So I'm dealing with the wrong guy. Why waste my time? And unfortunately, that reflects on the entire company, not just him. So I'm not sure it's integrity, but it's how a lack of integrity or just willing to listen and engage.
It's a lack of corporate. He needs Terry.
Totally.
All right, you got his name?
They need Terry.
We're probably not a fit,
It's a lack of the corporate culture is just wrong. I mean, Michael, picture if you walked by somebody's office and you heard them talking that way to a prospective client. I mean, you would just be apoplectic, right?
Yeah, and if you're going to change the behavior of the sales operation, it has to start from the top. So unless the leadership team is on board with the style of behavior that they feel is going to differentiate them in the marketplace and let them stand above those typical peddler kind of push selling organizations, training the sales operation and working with salespeople to tune them with the soft skills so that, they have a methodology, they understand questioning techniques, they can qualify, but their body language, the way they dress, their tonality turns people off. The selling system's not going to work. And again, they have to be able to walk into sales situations without some preconceived notion that they have the magic fairy dust that's going to cure everybody, because quite frankly, it doesn't. Or they'd have a 100% close rate.
All right, so let's move on to the next one, which is empathy. But a couple things that remind you that you can submit your questions in the control panel or on Twitter with #WelshExpert. The top 3 questions get an autograph book from Dan. Empathy, Dan. So I have this conversation all the time with my staff, and I was just blown away and so excited to see it in your book. Talk to me about your point of view here.
So let's just define empathy, which stated succinctly, is the ability to put yourself in the other person's shoes and to feel what they're feeling. You wouldn't think this was that difficult a quality. I mean, it's something I think we all like to be thought of as being empathetic. The problem is that we all have agendas. And while we're pushing our agenda, whatever it may be, we think our agenda is much more important than whatever the other person is. The other person becomes, as in your situation you just described, Daryl, you're just an object to overcome in order to generate revenues, which was the agenda of the salesperson. And that person was a perfect example of somebody who totally lacked empathy. They didn't really care who you were, what your constraints were, what you were interested in, what you weren't interested in. So empathy, along with grit, correlates very, very highly, not just with success in sales, but with success in life. If you ask people the trait that describes most accurately the leader of their company, if they think about it, they will say he or she is really empathetic.
Before I flip it over to get an opinion, I just want to kind of set the context. So if you're a sales professional on this webinar right now, or you're a sales leader, or you're an executive in the organization, our intent is that you're listening to this discussion today and you're auditing your own abilities or your team or your employees. because, if you've got this, success will take care of itself. But if you don't, you got to just start doing some work here. Terry, would love to get your thought on empathy. I mean, because that is so critical, but it's also a bit of a soft skill. And to Dan's point in your book, you talk about how so many of these things you can learn, but you also made reference that, empathy is the one trait that maybe is not natural to everybody's DNA. So I guess I'm curious, how do you handle that as a sales professional?
Yeah, empathy. This one might be a little bit more controversial in that, from our perspective, we've got a little bit of a different point of view on that one. From our point of view, empathy is a double-edged sword. Salespeople who become overly empathetic may miss the opportunity to help the client help themselves. And so I'll give you a specific example. A client who knows they have a gap between where they want to get to with their business and where they are currently is feeling somewhat concerned about that gap, has a time frame in mind to grow their business, as an example, has shared that with the consultant or the advisor. If the advisor becomes overly empathetic with respect to how that leader is feeling right now, and maybe their job is on the line and that sort of thing, and starts to make some suggestions with respect to a solution or a strategy to close the gap, and then starts to hear some excuses from the prospective client as to why that can't happen. It could be, well, the timing's not great right now, or, I don't know if we could really get the budget to do that. If that salesperson has too much empathy, they will empathize with that, and they'll realize, $150,000 or $50,000 or $5,000, that's a lot of money. I can see your point. And they're going to miss the opportunity to help hold that prospective client accountable for fixing their situation. So it's really important to separate being empathetic with your client and showing empathy. And so we must engage emotionally with the client, but we can't allow ourselves to be drawn into what they may be using as an excuse and empathize with that. So it's a delicate balance. We have to be close to them. We have to walk a mile in their shoes, really appreciate it from their point of view. And I totally agree with Dan's point of view. Totally bang on. If we're overly consumed with our own agenda, then how can we even appreciate what they're caring about? So we have to care about what they care about. But if we care more than they do about the problem, then we're going to be guilty of pushing them to do something they're not ready or willing to do.
So here we have a small area of disagreement, but
Okay.
maybe it's just based on different experiences.
Or
My
semantics.
experience with people that I coach and that I've spoken with subsequent to the publication of this book is not that they have too much empathy. My experience is that most salespeople have no empathy. Mm-hmm. They have very little interest in anybody else's agenda other than their own.
Yeah.
It's certainly clear to me that if it's kind of like loving too much, there's this expression, you just can't love a child too much. I would say absolutely I agree that if somebody engages in the kind of over-empathetic conduct that you just described, that could be a problem, but that's probably some tiny percentage. We really need to get people to focus on the interests of other people rather than our own interests. And what that starts with is, frankly, just shutting up and listening to other people, not thinking what you're saying is more important than what they could be saying, and showing a genuine interest in their agenda. So if we look at the scope of people, I'm just guessing here, I could be totally wrong, but 90% or so of salespeople could use improvement in empathy. But obviously, if you get people who just get so carried away, I mean, I would agree.
Yeah, and I totally agree with what you're saying as well. The majority of people, again, they're very much self-focused by human nature. We tend to be needy as human beings. We need to get our needs met. So we're not really in a position to focus on the needs of other people. And by needs, I'm talking not just about their business needs, but their emotional needs as well. And we can be a contributor to that. But salespeople who go over the line are afraid to ask tough questions because they're afraid that they're going to damage the rapport.
The relationship.
And they need to ask tough questions. it's part of our credibility as sales professionals to be able to comfortably, in a nurturing way, challenge the thinking of that prospective client.
And I think all of these characteristics are tied together in one way or another. I don't know how I can have complete integrity if I don't have some empathy for you. You know, if I'm just pushing my agenda, that's not really integrity, right? So I think they all tie together. And fortunately, in our profession, although we're not all these soft people, we're really number driven and all the rest. So we just seem to have a sense for that. We have a sense for, because usually in our environment, what's happening is it's the stress of getting everything done, the deadlines and all of that. So we all are aware of that. We keep it in our mind. So I think we are generally empathetic, and also this notion of being having integrity, sort of, that all blends together. And I think fortunately that's not an issue for most of my people.
Can you teach it? I mean, have you ever had an experience with your people where you really are trying to raise awareness about, it really isn't all about us. It's really about our clients, and they're going through a really difficult time here. So rather than just delivering bad news, maybe we should be a little more understanding of what's happening to them in their lives.
I don't know. I'm in the process of trying to teach it to one chap, and I think it's experience driven too, right? In the early stages of your career, you're all, you're jacked up. I want to make an impression. And as you get further into your career and you build relationships with people and your clients that you've worked with for a while, all of a sudden you start to think, we're more than just advisor now. We're almost friends, right? And we share common things. We talk about family and all of that. So I think it develops in that way. But there are some guys that are still so focused on, I want to be a star here, and I've got a bit of an ego, and I need to build all this, that you got to sort of, dial it back a bit.
The one thing I know from empathy is that when I have a sales rep who's empathetic to my situation, I just start to trust him a little more. I know he's got an agenda. Don't kid yourself. I'm talking to a sales guy, right? He's got a quota. I get it. But if he's taking time out to listen, he's so much further than every other person out there I've talked to. So let's move on to the next one, which is emotion. Now, and I love this visual because it just nails it. Dan, talk to me about the point you're making on emotion in your book.
Well, it's really, the point I'm making is, I wouldn't state it as emotion as much as emotional connection. No good thing in life happens unless you've established an emotional connection with somebody. And this comes perfectly in order, because grit, as Michael said, all these things work together. Grit, integrity, empathy. These are all traits that help us stay in the game and establish an emotional connection. The trick really is, how do you establish that emotional connection? As a practical matter, there's a person in front of you. You want to make a sale, or you want to make a good impression. How do you go about doing that? And the answer, really based on overwhelming evidence, is you ask questions in order to elicit information. You don't do this in a manipulative, insincere way, and you don't ask questions that are, it's not a cross-examination. You're genuinely interested in learning about the other person, learning who he or she is, how they got to where they are. We've kind of lost our humanity in business. Strangers walk in the door, and if we're accountants, we're saying to them, well, what were your profits last year? Instead of, tell me how you got to where you are. How did you build up this business? Do you have children? What do you do for fun? We've lost the ability to communicate in a normal level with people. So the trick simply is, what I say to everybody is, at that first meeting, here's how I'm going to judge you. Did any sentence you utter end in a period? If it did, that's not good. I want every sentence to end with a question mark, except when you're being asked a question, at which time you'll answer that question as briefly and directly as you can, and then you'll ask another question, and you'll keep that process going. So emotional connections are absolutely critical.
Especially when the question you're asking is seeking further clarification to something the prospective client just said, because that communicates to the client that I'm with you, I'm not going down my agenda. So, Dan, that's really interesting. Say some more about what you meant about X.
This is a great point.
Yeah.
Because now what we're talking about is, I don't know if you find this, Terry, and and Michael as well, I find so many times people say things to me that are really interesting. And I, of course, have heard what they've said, and I ask the logical follow-up question.
Right.
I mean, the most typical thing is when we say to people, "How are you?" We don't even hear their answer. We just expect they're going to say fine, right?
Yeah.
And I honestly believe that if we said to somebody, "How are you?" and they said, "I just got a diagnosis of a terminal illness," we would then say, "Great, let's move on to my agenda."
Exactly.
We don't hear
Yeah.
what they're saying.
Yeah.
So listening carefully is every bit as important as asking questions.
But you see, when people walk into the situation, if they're carrying their own baggage with respect to, I need to get this deal. This has to go really, really well. When I report back to Michael, he's waiting by the phone, and when I get to the airport, he's waiting for the call to hear how the meeting went. That's in my head. How can I active listen? How can I engage, and how can I be empathetic?
Right. You have to let go of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to be able to walk in and say, you know what? And back to the coaching thing that Michael was talking about, one of the things that kind of works for us is getting people to care less about the outcome and care more about the client.
I totally agree.
So, forget about getting the deal.
Right.
Walk in thinking, you know what, it's probably not going to go anywhere. We're probably not going to be a good fit. Let's just build a relationship and see where it goes. Let's discover with one another whether or not there's any reason for us to keep talking. And if there isn't, let's just call it for what it is, and we'll part company, and maybe we'll see each other at a networking event, right?
Well said.
I think I might make the emotional connection a bit previous to what you guys are talking about. So from my perspective, it's chit chat. It's humor. I mean, nothing makes me feel comfortable with a person like humor. So we'll throw a few jokes back and forth, and then talk about family, and then talk about the Senators, or talk about the football team, your favorites. And then all of a sudden we're just chatting. Now we're chatting. Now let's open it up and chat about some more. So that's how I sort of try and build an emotional connection. And it's not because I want to, it's just because that's the way I get started, right? That's, let's chit chat a bit.
And that's your comfortable style, right?
Yeah.
So, just to push back a little bit, if I can have permission to do that, depending on the nature, style of personality behavior of the other party, they may be meeting you at that point, but you're causing them to operate in a manner that's just a little less comfortable than how they would normally engage in business, right? And so we have to very quickly have the skill, have the ability to determine quickly on a handshake and eye contact within the first 3 to 5 seconds, is this individual a net bottom line, driver, dominant type, or are they more engaging, interactive, social, have some safe chit chat? Are they more relationship oriented? Are they more fact based? And adjust our conversation quickly to be able to match and mirror that of the other person. And therein lies the establishment of rapport much more quickly. And there's science, there's methods to doing that.
So I mean, I don't want to do business with everybody. And if I sort of start out that way and I get a bunch of pushback, and maybe I'm not the right guy for you, right? Because if I'm going to do a long-term business, we're going to chit-chat, I'll find somebody else that meets your characteristics, and they'll be out here very soon, because life's too short, right?
Yeah, sure.
But
So let's talk about chit chat. Even the term chit chat, I think, is a great misnomer. What I tell people is, if in that conversation that you're talking about, if that whole hour is chit chat, you have done a great job. You are going to get that client, because that client and you are now relating as two normal people who are just talking about, do we have something in common? And the assessment that person is making is, can I trust you? Because that's really all I care about. You're going to be my accountant? That's a big deal for me. I need to know I can trust you. So the longer the chit-chat goes on, the better off it is. People describe salespeople as like pythons waiting to strike. And this is, of course, the opposite image we want to give. So I have had experiences exactly as Terry has mentioned, where people come in, I attempt to engage in some conversation, and they'll look at me and say, look, I have 3 questions. That's what I'd like to know the answers to. When I get that, I give them the answers as briefly as I can to those questions, and then I ask them other questions. Why is that important to you? Why are you so concerned about that? And I sooner or later, I still want to know about them as a person. I do feel the way you do, though. If I get like a humorless person who I really can't relate to, I know that our relationship is going to be doomed from the beginning. So why not just say that? I totally agree. There are lots of people they could hire.
Yep.
We're not the only people around. So.
All right, I'm going to jump in here. And just in the essence of time, we're going to move on to the idea of assumptions. I'm sure this is a hot button for Terry, but I'll give Dan the chance to set the stage here. Talk to me about assumptions and the point you make in your book.
So I'll tell you a story in my book that tells you everything you need to know about assumptions. A true story. Two people are swimming in different lanes at a local club. A man and a woman. It's an attractive woman, and to make the story brief, the guy hits on the woman. And, says a couple of things, and she completely ignores him, doesn't say a word. And they get out, and the guy looks at her and says, I think, it's okay, I'm not suggesting that I'm the greatest guy in the world, but I think it was really rude of you not to even acknowledge that I was talking to you. And she looked at him and mouthed the words, I am deaf. So what this tells us is, do not make assumptions. I mean, you can solve the assumption problem very simply. Don't make assumptions. I have in my life very often made erroneous assumptions about people based on insufficient and inaccurate data. And when I got to know them better, I was totally wrong. So I now start every relationship like an open slate to be filled in.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest gaps that result in a lot of unpaid consulting proposals that don't close, et cetera, is because salespeople make too many assumptions. And it starts with the first assumption that they make walking in for the first meeting, that I just know we're going to be a great fit. And that thinking drives how they're feeling. And how they're feeling is that I want to get this deal, I'm going to get this deal, and then their behavior, is just a reflection of that. They don't ask enough questions. When people say things to them, they don't ask a question to get clarification, and both parties leave the meeting thinking two different things. The prospective client thinks, I'm never going to meet with this person again, but I said, why don't you get me a proposal and we'll take a look at it. And the advisor runs away, spends the weekend not going to the kids' hockey game, but puts together the proposal, gets it back on Monday in order to exceed expectations. But the other side has a different understanding as to what's going to take place, and they're not going to be doing business.
So I see a question here, Terry, that's probably you're the best one to answer.
Let me take a look. Which one is it? Just refer me to it.
I sell property tax appeals.
On a
reviews.
contingency basis.
On a contingency basis.
The client pays if tax savings are realized. Very tough sell as it almost is too good to be true.
I gave it to you because it's a difficult question that requires real expertise, so I thought you'd be the best one to handle this.
Yeah, and if I had my other glasses on, I'd be able to read the question, Daryl. We were just commenting before the webinar how small the print is for some of us that have some failing eyesight. Well, if we were in real time, I'd probably ask you to expand a little bit, maybe give me an example so I could better appreciate the perspective. So let me see if I can.
I might be able to give you an example.
Okay.
So there's lots of people that are doing this, and they do it somewhat in the R&D tax field credit.
Okay.
So my view is that I think you have paid too much in property taxes, and if I go through and sort of audit your records and look at where you've been, I think I might be able to get you some savings.
Sure.
Are you willing to split those savings with me?
Right. Okay, so why is that difficult, Michael? I mean, it sounds like a no-risk proposition, right?
Well, that's what he's saying. It's too good to be true, and they kind of wonder, well, what's the hitch here? And so I think that's the pushback. Is
Right.
This is too good to be true.
Okay.
What am I missing?
All right, so it sounds like there could be, and again, I apologize, I have to make an assumption here, and the screen I'm looking at right now is no assumption. So,
Watch Daryl doesn't hit you.
yeah, right. Let's make the assumption that they don't trust that that's real. It's too good to be true. And so it would be really important from a tactical point of view, because you haven't not yet done the analysis, you haven't seen the reports, you haven't seen the records. So with high integrity, it would be important, as long as you believe this, that you're not a good fit for everyone. So I would suggest that as you open up the conversation, you pre-stage the discussion by simply explaining, I do work with organizations where I can often show them a tax savings. But, I don't want to make the assumption up front that I can do that in this particular situation, It doesn't happen 100% of the time, but if you're open enough to sit down and have a conversation, we can ask and answer each other's questions, and probably within 15 minutes or 20 minutes, we can come to one of two conclusions. One conclusion might be there's really no reason for us to keep going with this, and I'm totally okay with that. Or alternatively, through what you'd share with me and my answers to your questions might lead us both to think maybe we should take a closer look at this. You'll share some statements with me. We'll drill down, and we'll come back to you with an unbiased opinion. Is that something you might be comfortable with?
So the next question is an easy one, so I'll assign it to myself. Will CEOs take time for an hour of chit-chat? So, good question. I didn't mean to give you the impression that every meeting should be extensive chit-chat. What I meant was every meeting should be an effort not to make a sale, but to establish an emotional connection. Every meeting with a CEO is not going to go the same way. If I walk in and I'm talking to a CEO and they say, I have 10 minutes and here are the 3 things I want to know, I'm not going to engage in extensive chit-chat. So you're going to follow the agenda of the client, whatever it is, but you will always have opportunity to ask questions, and that's what you should be looking for.
And let me jump on top of that just quickly. I was the one who used the word chit-chat. I characterize chit-chat as safe level 1 communication. It's non-offensive. It's about the weather. It's about summer's coming. It's about golf. And again, I don't want to assume Dan's position, but I think the kind of conversation that Dan is talking about is authentic conversation, where I really have a sincere interest in knowing who you are as an individual.
Right.
And that's so important in building trust. And that can happen very, very quickly, or it can take a longer amount of time, depending on the style and level of engagement of the other party.
All right, so I'm going to jump in here. We've got 2 points that we want to cover and then get into the Q&A. So again, send us your questions. The best 3, of course, will get a book from Dan signed. It's awesome. On Twitter, #WelshExpert or in your control panel. The topic here you make is PowerPoint. And you just scored so many points with me and you had this conversation. So hit me with your point you're making here, Dan.
Okay, PowerPoint, whiteboard, both bad, don't use them. Okay, so that's my bottom line. Use them if you must in a large group setting, but for one-on-one conversations or small group settings, you're just creating a barrier to making an emotional connection when you're always turning, looking at some complex presentation. The focus is going to be on the presentation, and I want the focus to be on the relationship you're establishing with the person in front of you. So I want eye contact, normal conversation. You can't do that with a PowerPoint or a whiteboard. If you're doing a larger presentation, by the way, I do a lot of large presentations, I don't use a PowerPoint or a whiteboard, but if you feel you must use it, I'll give you one great tip. Have your PowerPoint professionally designed. These homemade designs are just terrible. People can't even read them. They make no impact. They're really just, they present an unprofessional image. So I'm very down on PowerPoint based on many, many studies.
Yeah, they're typically cheat notes because the presenter is insecure in the message.
Good point.
You nailed it. I mean, that's my biggest beef.
It's a great point.
And I know we produce a ton of these webinars, right, all the time. And I actually have quite often a lot of pushback with people. They want more on these slides. And the point being, if you are an expert, and everybody who's a panelist here is an expert, you should be able to speak to this without even batting an eye. So they're just, it's not a crutch. It's not, there to help you through it. I want to listen to you. I don't want to read ahead. And that's what I'll do. I'll read ahead. So,
well, here's a neat thing I picked up from a top 3 tax and audit firm, a global organization a number of years back.
That would be not Welsh? Is that what you're getting at, Terry?
That was before I was in Ottawa, and I had not yet met the great Welsh people,
Nice,
but
nice
actually in a former life,
yeah.
working in Chicago.
Have I got a watch for you? Go ahead.
Yeah. I was running a training organization down in Chicago, and we were drafted into this particular company, and I learned a lot from them. It's fantastic people, and one of the things they taught me was the concept of a single frame. A single frame is where you're going to sit down at the coffee table with the CEO. No pitch, but a complex concept that they wanted to communicate very, very quickly in 30 seconds or less to tee up the conversation. And so it's simply a visual. There's no text. And they'd have their own internal graphics people, their artists, would take this concept with respect to, it could be a business process review, TQM stuff that they were doing back in the day, and they would build a pictorial visual representation of that depicted current state, future state, the gap, and what the solution looked like. And these things were brilliant. And so typically in a CEO office, you've got a discussion area, coffee table, sit down, have a cup of coffee. They put this on the table, and there was lots of blank space for that CEO to take some notes, put some words on it, and he'd fold that up and he'd put it in his breast pocket at the end of the meeting. So there was a takeaway. But again, the meetings were highly conversational, but this just allowed some structure. And I thought they were great. I've been using them ever since. They're awesome. Single frame.
All right, let's hit our last point, which is storytelling. Dan, what's the point you're making here?
It goes back to our youth when our parents would read us stories. I mean, there's a long psychological basis for why we like stories. We can relate to stories. Here's a great story of when Steve Jobs was dying and knew he was dying. He gave this famous commencement speech at Stanford University, and he started it by saying, I've got 3 stories to tell you. No big deal, just 3 stories. And he had everybody from that line. So our comfort zone is data and abstractions and theories and concepts and rules and regulations, but people really relate well to stories. So I notice when I give talks, when I'm talking generally, I sense there's some attention, but not all that much. But when I say, now let me tell you a story of how exactly this worked in real life, now I can just feel the attention riveting.
Yeah, we use the concept of third-party stories in all of our conversational selling. It's a story about another client, another situation, and it's therefore by definition non-confrontational. You're not confronting the client to say yes or no that that's them. You give them a story that they can socialize and align with.
And if you guys want more proof that this works, real time, I'm getting tweets and texts throughout the conversation of this webinar right now, direct to me, that they are loving the conversation and that they've got their entire team sitting around phones right now listening to it and watching it. They don't normally do that, and they're loving the stories. So that's huge. And I guess I would go one step further. So a lot of this is sales we're talking about, but don't forget, sales, marketing is just sales earlier. All right, that's all it is. You're selling a little bit earlier. It's a softer sell. And so even whether you're doing a webinar or a blog or whatever, everything we're talking about here applies. Tell a story. Don't make the assumptions. Have the empathy. Speak with integrity. Share the stories that are all about the grit so people can relate to you. So selling is the whole sales and marketing aspect we're doing here. With that, we're going to go into our Q&A period. And what we've done here is we've got the slide up where you can, I'm going to strongly encourage you to follow these people on Twitter. All right. So Dan is brilliant. Terry's incredible. Michael's not only smart, but he's good looking too. He's really annoying. And of course, you can follow him on LinkedIn as well. So lots of content being shared there, lots of wisdom and advice. Please do that. They've also gone one step further. They've allowed me to share their email addresses. So if there's a question you have, fire it off and they'll respond to you. All right. So that's going to stay up for the duration. So you can do that. I'll also do another plug here for Dan's book, The Smartest Sales Book You'll Ever Read. All right. Check it out. The top 3 questions are going to get a copy today. That's pretty cool. And but you'll see it on Amazon. And so I'm just thanking Dan for his time here. We got a variety of questions. We've handled a couple already. So let me just pop a few out here. Question: if your biggest challenge is not helping potential clients see the benefit of your service, but actually getting them to close, which of these 7 traits we put over here, need to improve? So it's not helping them see the benefit. They see it, but you want to get them to close. So Terry, we talked about grit, integrity, empathy, emotion, assumptions, PowerPoint, and storytelling. And you can also go off page if you want to.
Wow. Tough question.
It's a great question.
Yeah. I think if there'd be one takeaway that kind of knits them all together, I'd have to say that, our income as sales professionals, and again, I use the term sales kind of boldly, and I know in the work that I've done in services firms, the word sales can be kind of a dirty word because of the context that it derives. But our income and our success is more directly related to, I guess, the information that we go out and gather from people and what we learn about them and their situation than it is about telling people what we know. And so all of those things kind of tie in. And you know, if I make assumptions, I can't do that. If I lack empathy and I get emotionally amped up going into a situation, I can't do that. And so all of those things that we've talked about today, it's like they're individual muscles that have to be constantly worked on. And I've been at this a long time, but I got to tell you, I was on a phone conversation with a prospective client just last week. And I caught, you know, I lost it emotionally. I mean, I didn't go postal, but I got a little bit emotionally connected. It was a great deal. I mean, we're going to probably make our year end halfway through the year if we get this deal. And so the head triggers, it's natural. And, you know, before I started to work on that, I would have gone through the whole call and totally blown it. But I caught myself just in the nick of time, hopefully. I'll know in the next conversation whether I caught it, but at least we're set up for another conversation, right? So, I don't know. I mean, that's my 2 cents.
So I don't like the concept of closing. I think this is a very counterproductive idea that's planted in the heads of people who are trying to make sales, that it's their obligation to close a sale. If you follow the basic principles in my book, the client closes the sale. When the client is ready, the client is going to tell you what additional information they need. You will convey that information, and they will say, how do we get started? It takes all the pressure off you. It's not about us, it's about them. So don't take it upon yourself to believe that it's your obligation to somehow manipulate the situation to the close, because you're putting pressure on yourself where it doesn't belong. It's up to the client to close.
Yeah, we call it really confirming what's been agreed to and move forward, or close the file, so that you're not driving low return on time invested by hounding, pestering, and chasing people who are afraid to tell you that they're not going to go forward. Make it easy for that prospective client to be honest with you, and if it's not a good fit, let them be able to express that in the conversation. So I agree with Dan. It's not about closing. There is no close. The only question at the end of the conversations in the process is, Mr. Client, what would you like me to do next, if anything?
So I'm a little more practical than these guys. I think the emotional connection is going to help you with the close. I think if you can develop that rapport and have that sense of wanting to be together in the future, like, this was fun, I want to work with you because I want to be with you. To me, that's the best part.
Well, we're saying the same thing.
Yeah,
I believe the emotional connection is absolutely critical. Without the emotional connection, no good thing is going to happen.
Okay.
But once you establish that emotional connection, I, as the prospect, am going to say to you, okay, Michael, how do we proceed? I've just closed because you've done such a good job of establishing the emotional connection.
On emotion too, thanks for bringing it up, because the provider has to, if they're going to do their due diligence and maintain the fiduciary responsibility before they invest time, effort, and resources on the part of the firm to put something together, we really have to engage emotionally with the client to ascertain and qualify whether the client is emotionally committed enough to deal with their situation, or are they just intellectually considering options. What's going to really drive them to move forward and make an investment with you, not just in terms of money, but also resources and time and effort? Let go of what they're doing now to take some risk and do it differently. Is there enough of an emotional driver? And too many, again, quote unquote, sales professionals think that there's an opportunity just because they've been able to determine what the intellectual requirements or needs are. They haven't gone deep enough in the conversation. And if you can't engage emotionally, you'll never get to that level of understanding.
I just got a comment from one of the audience saying, awesome webinar. It was so interesting. You may need a part 2. So based on that, I'm going to call a bit of an audible here. We would have gotten rid of you folks, well, 5-10 minutes ago, so you can go to your next appointment. But we have lots of questions here. I'm going to go through a few more. If you can stick around, that'd be great. And if you can't, we understand, and we thank you for your time. Dan, I'm going to throw this one to you here. As you go through all of these words, so grit, integrity, empathy, emotion, assumptions, PowerPoint, storytelling. And these are just 7 that we pulled out of the book here, folks. There's way, way many more. We should get to happiness sometime. Then the question is, which would you select as the number one most important?
Well, as I've said, a lot of these things go towards establishing an emotional connection. So to me, establishing an emotional connection is the most important. But I don't want people to think that this is like some kind of a trick. I mean, establishing emotional connection takes a lot of work. You have to have empathy. You have to be sincere. You have to have integrity. You have to be genuinely interested in the other person as a person. And you do it either as Michael said, or as Terry said, or as I said, or whatever you're comfortable doing. But it's a package.
All right, we have another question here, and I'd love to hear Terry's point of view and Dan and Michael's, frankly. Question here is this: phone conversation or emailing? Which way is better for sales communication? Who wants to jump in? Because I know you all do.
I'd like to hear the CEO's perspective.
I want to hear.
first.
Yeah, Michael, it's on you.
Yeah.
Yes, so it's got to be the phone conversation, although we all fall into the trap of the email because of the time we can do it. It's easy to get it out. But really, if you're serious, I think the phone. You can at least start to sense where people are going. It's very difficult when you get an email to sense, am I connecting? Are we getting together on this? But in a phone conversation, you can get a much better feel. So I say the phone call.
There's a pecking order of contacts for how to establish, for the likelihood of establishing an emotional connection. A face-to-face meeting is the optimal setting to establish an emotional connection, but often that's not possible. So if that's not possible, I agree with Michael, a telephone conversation where you can have hopefully a bilateral exchange, which means you're not the only one doing the talking, that's a good way to establish an emotional connection. After that, texting and email is fine, but those are real barriers. It's really hard to connect with people. In fact, the possibility of a miscommunication goes up exponentially when you start sending emails to each other. I have a personal rule that I don't put anything substantive in an email if I can help it.
I hope my wife's not listening in because she really gets mad when I email. Pick up the phone.
Oh,
I did some work in front of a teleprompter for a little while, and before I could remember stuff. And an email is nothing more than a teleprompter where that email is on a screen, and as the other emails are coming in, it cycles down to the bottom of the screen, down below the desktop, never to be seen again. And so many people are hooked on email, and they spend so much time, putting together this beautiful message that's never going to be read. And so you can take all of these tactics and you can put them into two buckets, active or passive. A passive tactic, you have no control over what's going on. Active means you're engaged in it, you have control. So picking up the phone is an active approach, right? Using LinkedIn, pinging people on LinkedIn and saying, look, I've got 3 questions I'd like to ask you. Would you be okay taking 5-10 minutes with me? We get huge success doing that, huge success. 50% and more response. As long as you word it correctly and you can relate to what the individual is involved in, that's much more active.
the biggest thing I do with my staff and my employees is tell them pick up the phone, especially, and there's an age bracket, right? Especially, the 30 and younger bracket, they're scared of the phone. And part of the reason they're scared of the phone is because it's just not part of their normal DNA. That's not what they do. And you have to teach them that. And it's
but, Daryl, one of the things I've found is, because I have been fortunate in my ability to generate business over the years, and if people say, what's the number one reason why you're able to do that? It's that I return phone calls promptly. What good is it if you get an inquiry and it takes you a day or two to do it? I mean, even if you're traveling, it's possible to have somebody call and say, he's traveling, he wants you to know that he'll get back to you tomorrow. So don't lose it all by finally generating that inquiry you've been waiting for and then not promptly returning the call. It may not seem all that important, whatever the event is, it's not like we're neurosurgeons, but to the person calling you, it's critically important. They want to hear back from you.
It's important. You nailed it. It's important to them. All right, this is a really interesting question. How does someone with social anxiety, so someone who is hyper-conscious of other people's behavior or reactions and has a fear of being judged or perceived poorly as incompetent, how do they succeed in sales? That's the question.
Well, probably not going to like the answer, but maybe they won't succeed in sales. again, that kind of mindset, the beliefs, the attitude, the self-perception will cause counterproductive behavior comparable to going in and trying to prove how good I am and not paying attention to the agenda and the needs and the feelings of the other party. And so, sales is a tough business. We deal with a lot of rejection, and it hurts. And, salespeople who tell me that, that doesn't affect them, I think you've got something wrong with you. Every one of us has some need for approval, and that's a psychological term we can evaluate and determine through testing just to what degree one has that. But there are exercises, there are things that you can do to overcome that, and detune how important it is to you to be liked by others and accepted by others. And again, this may not be palatable to some people, but you can go all the way from, practice meditation to get yourself centered, to get your spiritual house in order and realize that there's only one judgment day, and let's get over the fact that people might be judging us in real time. Do the right thing for people, get over yourself, and when it's all over, it's over, right?
My experience with this would be that person probably doesn't have anywhere near those characteristics that they think they have. So this is something they've created in their mind and has brought on themselves. And my suggestion to you is go and talk to 5 or 6 of your colleagues and ask them, is that what they think of me? Is that how I'm perceived by people? And I bet you I'd be shocked if really that it's like that.
Actually, this individual actually is in a better position because they would have a high level of self-awareness. But I love your point, Michael, about talk to some other people, because you may be hypersensitive and your belief is not consistent with how others see you. Mm-hmm. But the worst is people who have very low self-awareness, who think they're really, really good, and they go around offending people.
So at first I thought it took a lot of courage just to ask that question. Yeah. So I really appreciate the fact that you asked that question. My take would probably be somewhat different. I mean, if I heard that from you when you were sitting in this room, I would want to know more about why you feel that way. Because really, we need a cure for the problem before we can start talking about how to be effective at sales. And it might be something that dealing with a professional therapist would be very useful to find out. Why do you feel that way, and what's the genesis of that? So you're obviously very self-aware, which I think is a wonderful personal trait, and I'd be focused on solving that problem.
As I listen to the question, what I see already is the person clearly has integrity, they have an emotional connection, they know their own challenges, which says you probably have the foundation of some grit in your life that you can react to.
Yes.
So you've got, and because of that, you're going to be empathetic to others, and you're going to you probably won't make any assumptions because you're afraid of making a mistake. So I would suggest you've got a lot of the raw ingredients, and building upon the advice that Terry and Michael and Dan have provided, there could be a future or not. But the fact that you're asking the question, that's a brilliant start. I'm going to call it there, guys. We've got more questions. So, folks, if we didn't get to it, I am sorry. There's just been too many questions coming today. The audience has been phenomenal. The panelists have been incredible. But hopefully you captured their Twitter, you followed them, you got them on LinkedIn so you can track their shares. Feel free to email any of them. Check out their websites. Hopefully these people have all dripped of integrity today. And hopefully the PowerPoints you saw today was minimal. And we can empathize with the challenges you may have, and that's why you're here. But we make no assumptions. So if you have a question, come and ask us. But with that, we're done. So, guys, thanks for joining us. Look to get a copy of this real soon in your inbox. I want to thank Terry Ledden. Thank you so much, Terry.
Thanks a lot, Daryl.
I want to thank Michael Birch. Thanks, Michael.
It's great.
And I want to thank our special guest, New York Times bestselling author Daniel Solin, the smartest sales book you'll ever read.
It was great fun, Daryl. Thank you.
All right, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. We had a blast. You take care. Bye-bye.